I wanted to run a Call of Cthulhu campaign for a long time. I ran mini campaigns before, one-shots, and I've played in several various COC modules. I've even ran a game using basic role-playing engine and made a whole entire video on the system. Fortunately though, I decided to change that because I am currently running one of Chaosium's greatest campaigns of all time with some awesome players in my paid game on Start Playing. So this series of videos will be my way to do two things. Firstly, break down how I am running horrors on the Orient Express in hopes other keepers can reference this. Secondly, this will spread necessary resources from handouts to guides that might prove helpful for your game. And also, you'll get to hear about all the goofy awesome stuff my players and I get up to. So, if you're a fan of Call of Cthulhu or horror RPGs in general, grab your luggage and let's head back to 1920s, everyone, because we're hopping aboard the Orient Trail in this multi-part campaign known as Horror on the Orient Express. Horror on the Orient Express is a 768-page Call of Cthulhu mega campaign separated into a 2-volume hardcover with PDF editions available online. The game was originally published by Chaosium in 1991. There was a revised and expanded edition that was created in 2014. This included a lot of optional scenarios that take place in many other COC eras. In 2021, Chaosium created a reprint since the 2014 boxes, to say the least, were super expensive and hard to come by if you didn't want to drop a crap ton of money for any of the box sets. In terms of its premise, Hoti itself is a big old 1920s MacGuffin chase across Europe and parts of the Middle East. The investigators are asked by their old friend Julius Smith to visit London. He has research on the occult and wants to invite them to participate in that academic research. There, the story unravels as they are caught up in a mystery surrounding the Safgar Simulacrum, a powerful statue that can threaten the globe of whoever holds this power. Thus, it is up to the investigators to collect the pieces of the powerful scroll and simulacrum and battle the many forces that vie for global control. But now that you have a basic premise, it's best to gauge if this game is for you. If everyone loves the idea of investigators unraveling a massive, bloody, and gross and fascinating mystery that will require the investigators to travel across many countries, then this is perfect. Some of the optional scenarios even add extra, options for you to play different characters and utilize different skills in Call of Cthulhu. Some examples include Cthulhu by Gaslight, Cthulhu Dark Ages, and Cthulhu Regency, to name a couple out of the many others. Also, if you love high lethality campaigns where everyone's on the edge of your seat, then Hoti will deliver hard, fast, and ruthlessly. As stated in the book, the original playtesting for this campaign revealed a 70% casualty rate by insanity or by death. The Investigator's Survival Guide section below provides suggestions for keeping the campaign on the rails. Nice, Chaosium. Anyhow, this is specifically for the GMs. There are bountiful amounts of suggestions on Reddit and blog posts for this campaign, some of which I will reference on occasion, like Total Party Kill's blog post on Hoti. In terms of VTT support, there isn't that much for Horror on the Orient Express. There is one for Fantasy Grounds, but nothing for Roll20. So us Roll20 enjoyers, we're kinda tough out of luck. You're going to need to convert a lot of your material from the book onto Roll20, so just make note of that. Also, this game is obviously a bit railroady and at times lacks giving players agency. Be sure to talk to your players about that. Overall, just communicate to your players that this campaign is going to obviously be on rails. If you can get past all of that, I think Horror on the Orient Express as a campaign is going to be awesome if both the players and the game master love railroads, love 1920s horror, and love unraveling mysteries across the world. If you are still here, at this point, I'll be going over major spoilers for Horror on the Orient Express. Of course, this won't cover every scenario because I haven't ran every scenario yet and I likely won't, but this will be going over major NPCs and GM specific content and an overview of the entire campaign. So for players in the audience, leave now. And especially for the players who are in my current COC campaign or ones who will be in my next one, please do not watch this, or you'll spoil the fun out of the skin-ripping and spine-chilling horrors that await you on the Orient Trail and beyond. And you wouldn't want to spoil that now, would you? Firstly, let's set a common goal. This is about having a fun, creative, and awesome time with everyone at the table. When I first opened up Horror on Orient Express, I doubted myself a lot. There are lots of locations, NPCs, handouts, and just a lot of information packed into a 2-book set. And this is going to be my most daunting task yet as a keeper of arcane lore. But as I read, prepared, and just sat with myself, I came to this thought. I don't need to be, or if I should try to be, a perfect game master. Your players are not perfect, and neither are you. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make bad calls. You're going to forget information. You're going to forget plot hooks. It happens, but that's okay. When those moments happen, ask for feedback, review your information, review your notes, and if need be, take a quick break from the game. Don't spend 10 plus hours prepping. Don't spend your whole day prepping. Don't stress yourself out over things you cannot figure out. I know this is very broad, but I genuinely do mean this. If you're going to pick up a campaign book like this, you want to come in with the right mindset, because if you don't, you're going to end up burning yourself out and you're not going to have fun. And that will transfer over to your players. So, check your energy, and by doing that, you're going to be better set to face the horrors of the Orient Express. There are multiple factions in this campaign. Many of them are vying for control over the simulacrum and the scrolls. You should know the motives for each of them. There are 3 major factions that are in the game that I've defined. The first is Salim Makrod. He is the founder of the cultist groups, Brothers of the Skin. He uses the power of the scrolls to rule the cult and has been doing that for centuries. The magic from the Scroll of the Belly, part of the Staffgar scrolls, replaces body parts but not his heart. So, he demands the simulacrum to restore his vitality and celebrate the Skinless One, an avatar of Nyarlathotep. His reasons for doing all of this are selfish and religious in nature. He's a zealot. He may see the investigators as nothing more than an annoyance, since he is technically unaware of his son meddling for world domination and political power. Next is Count Fenelek. Fenelek is an ancient being all the way back from the Dark Ages. As a count in the Regency era, he used his power, prestige, and his vampiric abilities to feed on innocents for centuries. He was cocky, and, well, cockiness got the better of him, and he got essentially, let's just say, knocked out. When the investigators come into the scene in the 1920s, Fennek lays in a dark cell, crazed, twisted, and hungry, blindly wanting the simulacrum to sustain his vampiric lifestyle. So, he follows the investigators and maybe even helps them as they collect the simulacrum. But it's only a matter of time until he wants it for himself, and will try to return to his former glory and feast for many centuries more. While he also wants power, his goal and how he goes about it is going to be a bit different. He, similar to Mehmet, will be behind the scene, but he'll be more entitled and more wanting to help the investigators since he wants simulacrum for himself. Finally is Mehmet Makrod. He's the son of Salim, but Mehmet's goals are different. He doesn't want to restore his vitality. He wants power. The simulacrum and the Skinless One are but tools for power, not for worship. His motive is ultimately global power, using the cult and thus using the investigators in his plot. And if you want a better / alternative summary, this Reddit post by Stolen Fires gives a great summary for players to reference. Pause the video here or check it out in the link in the description box below. The best bet is to write 1 to 2 sentences at the top of your notes about what their motives are. These will guide you when the players do something unexpected and draw the attention of one of 3 of these groups. Next, use the scenarios as guidelines, not law. This campaign is long. There are over 19 scenarios with 8 optional ones. I do not have the time to read through all of that in one go. The book is over 768 pages. As a game master, it's not possible for me to read all of that and then process all that information and then put it into VTT. So to avoid all that overworking, I have instead based my notes off of Sly Flourish's Lazy Dungeon Master's book. I keep my notes to 1 to 3 sentences for each of the bullet points, as shown below. They go as: review the investigators, write down the important NPCs, establish the important handouts, outline the locations, figure out the suggested end resolution in the campaign. Finally, reward/punish the investigators appropriately. For review the investigators, know what the investigators' strengths and weaknesses are. What are their skills and resources they bring to the table? Also, what are the investigators' motivations for taking on this investigation? Write down the important NPCs. I write down every NPC that is specific to the scenario. I go to the sub page of statistics and write their name, purpose in the scenario, and goal for the narrative. Establish the important handouts. I read through the handouts as you are reading through the scenario. Copy them into your given VTT and understand how these handouts help the players in understanding the story. Because if players miss handouts, it can easily stall the game. So be sure to use knowledge checks as needed when you're running the campaign. Outline the locations. Each scenario will have a map of some sort. For example, Dancers of the Evening Fog, which we'll be talking about today, has a map of London. Be sure when reading the scenario to mark down where handouts, where investigations, and where important plot points happen. For example, Julius Smith is the first NPC players will meet. He is pretty crucial to getting the story started. Depending on how you start the scenario, he can be found in many locations. For example, maybe his home, maybe the University of London, maybe the British Library or Museum. So it's important to understand the locations and how NPCs relate to them. Because if you don't, you're going to end up looking through your notes wondering, oh, where does this take place? Next is suggested end resolution. This is where you're supposed to write what is supposed to happen. I don't recommend writing multiple paragraphs because you cannot predict what your players will do. Yes, this game is on rails, literally. But if your players decide to end the session in a place that you weren't expecting, that's going to throw you off, so keep it vague. Finally, reward/punish the investigators appropriately. Write out the items or resources they are rewarded for completing scenario. Or write out what they might get if they resolve a puzzle or a solution. Is it sanity? Is it more information? Is it a weapon? So write out that important information. It will help you speed up the GMing process and also will avoid you looking through that massive 2-book set. Let's talk about the first scenario in OT, Dancers in an Evening Fog. This will be going over my players' decisions and how my players approach certain problems. This will also go over some GM caveats and GM tips that I encountered while running it. So without further ado, let's dive in. The group in the first few sessions consists of 3 characters. The characters are invited to London on behalf of Julius Smith as part of seeing the Mall's Day collection. This is a new room at the British Museum. Smith wants to invite the investigator specifically to the Challenger lecture, where he will present some of his occult research in the coming days. The group consists of Fei Fei, or Fei Zhao, a film star from Shanghai, China. She knew Julius Smith from his previous travels and her network as a film star. Patrick Starkey, an antiquarian from Limerick, Ireland. He served in World War I, but his antiquarian jobs connected him to Smith personally. And finally, Robert Smith, a private investigator who's seeing if Smith and the other occult items that he studies are being sold in an underground market or are being sold as contraband. And the biggest part that I as a game master had to face was how to introduce the players to Julius Smith. The book recommends giving the players an adventure or scenario before the horror on the Orient Express to introduce Julius Smith, who is the catalyst to the adventure. I didn't do that, but I do agree with that sentiment entirely. Because by having stakes and a connection to Julius Smith, it eases the tensions for players and also gives players a reason to care about Julius Smith beyond him just being a plot point. And there are a number of various Call of Cthulhu scenarios and adventures you can run them through. There's The Haunting, Edge of Darkness, Dead Light, The Sanatorium, The Code, and that's only some of them. There's hundreds of Call of Cthulhu 1920 scenarios. I could go on, but just make sure to create a strong connection with the British professor to your players. I personally recommend The Haunting or Edge of Darkness because I have either used those in my games or referenced them. Moving back to the story. The group meets at the Princess Restaurant and Hotel on New Year's Day. The conversation was mainly about exposition and introducing each of the characters, which is helpful, especially if you're playing with all new players. While the group was talking, I decided to include one of Mehmet's lackeys/clones following the conversation. He was simply tracing Smith's steps. This is not in the base campaign. but I did this to give the players immediately that something is off. Now, if you do include a hint at Mehmet's lackeys at the beginning part of the scenario or anything like that, I highly recommend you keep it vague. In my case, one character noticed a Turkish man watching them, but as soon as that character's line of vision was cut, that Turkish man was gone. It was creepy, it was subtle, and only one player, I believe, noticed. Ultimately, if you are going to include it, keep it subtle, keep it vague. Moving on, Julius Smith asked him to come to the Challenger lecture in 2 days, to show them his research. From there, I let the players explore London to their heart's content. I handed them a edited map of London, which is provided in the campaign, as shown here. So my first tip, keep track of travel in this game. Keeping a calendar gives the players a sense of urgency. You can also put in dates and times where extremely important political, social, and economic events happened in 1923. The game, and specifically the campaign book, has several mentioned here. This can ensure for some really cool roleplay moments when the players see these real-life stuff happening in front of them, or they can simply just ignore it. It's up to the players and GMs to decide that. My players didn't really include that into their conversation or into their roleplay, but who knows, maybe your table might be different. Tip 2. When the players have time to explore a city, let them explore. Let them roleplay seeing new art or meeting new people. You can, and I even recommend, should pull from the list of strangers on the train at the back of book 1 if you're looking for NPCs to populate the world and you don't want to create random NPCs. Of course, there are also plenty of 1920s COC generators for NPCs, for example, this one. I also recommend, if you are okay with this, including red herrings. But be careful of this. You don't want to sidetrack horror on Orient Express by including multiple red herrings about things that are not automatically related. What I did was include a graduate assistant who worked with Julius Smith, Elizabeth Lima. She was studying Mayan civilization and religious practices at the British Museum. Specifically, she was studying sacrifices from a historical perspective. I showed them art of Mayan sacrifices and gave a little bit of details about who Elizabeth Lima was. Was it at all related to the investigation? No. But it got the players thinking, and they definitely were hooked on that for quite some time. And stick around, you'll see how this turns out. So the investigators keep themselves busy at the British Museum and elsewhere until the Challenge Lecture. At the Challenger Lecture, they get to see Smith discuss his research in great detail. In Gamemasters, there is a lot of information on the apparitions that Smith talks about. And I'll be honest with you, none of it is important. There's over about 7 paragraphs worth of information, and none of it is really referenced beyond this chapter. So my personal recommendation is to either A, summarize it, or B, take time to write down the most important parts or what might the players latch onto. After the lecture, the investigators can, and in my case, did spot a mustached man in his late 30s talking to Smith. That is Mehmet Makrat. In the case of my investigators, they tried to intercept and get an idea of who this person was, since they saw this guy earlier 2 days ago at the restaurant. And let's just say the PI slammed into Julius while trying to intercept the conversation. This being a big embarrassment, they decided that maybe it might be a good time to call it a night. And Julius Smith, with a massive headache after getting hit in the face, agreed. The group does agree to meet Smith and plan to discuss more about his occult objects tomorrow evening. It is at this time, though, that Mehmet sets his plan into motion. Realizing Smith's isolation makes him a proper target. Using his magical prowess, he captures Smith and confronts Smith's faithful servant, Beddoes. Mehmet threatens Beddoes to work with him or else he will never see Smith again. Beddoes, fearing for his employer's safety, works with Makrat behind the scenes. This involves lighting the professor's home. Meanwhile, Mehmet summons the 3 pseudos or clones and murders them in cold blood to avoid getting caught for all of his actions. But there is one thing about this that doesn't make sense. Why would Mehmet do this? Yeah, it's cool and scary and intimidating that he has all these magical powers, but why would Mehmet draw so much attention to himself when he knows he's followed by the Brotherhood of the Skin by his father. So, come up with a reason why he commits this 3-man pseudo murder that isn't just, quote unquote, it's scary and crazy and outlandish. I personally recommend maybe creating sub-factions of the Brotherhood of the Skin, or maybe saying that these groups of people were going to betray him. You just need a decent reason behind the scene so that if the players ever figure out why he did it, you have an explanation for it. Moving back to our story though, the investigators the day after, on January 4th, hear nothing from Smith, so they go off to investigate what happened to him. And if you are following the calendar, and they have 2 dates before January 6th where they'll logically discover that Smith's house has been burnt, give them time to explore and talk to his colleagues. Study Smith's research and ask authorities about what happened. Build up the suspense of how no one has heard from Smith since the Mall's Day collection. Your investigators could find a lost journal containing the blood red fez in Smith's university office. Investigators could find a journal talking about them from the perspective of the professor. Does an officer come to the players possibly suspecting them / asking them questions on how they know Smith? Maybe they have another private investigator or cop outside of their hotel or place of living, and the investigators have to ask, why is there a cop outside their house? Or does the information and connection to Smith and his disappearance get the news / attention of their local consulate / immigration office? Obviously, you want to keep it in context 1923, but in the case of, say, foreign characters, say like Patrick or Faye, it might be worth considering how that affects them navigating London. Do they get a clue that a murder happened or that Smith's house has been burned? So maybe they investigate the Chelsea Hotel. In my case, the players did. They found officers inspecting the horrifying scene at the hotel. Using the private eyes network and some really awesome social checks, they got access to the crime scene. While exploring the bathroom, the film star found something really awful: a flayed leg. This caused a sanity roll and a whole slew of drama explaining what Faye saw. Overall, it was a shit time for all of them, but it was still fun. Nevertheless, after 2 days passed, they finally got to meet Julius Smith. Beddoes, while they were exploring one of the Turkish men's shops, came to them in need. Beddoes brought them to Smith's hideout, and this is where a big exposition dump happens. When they're at the hideout, they need to get a lot of important information to get the adventure started. The first is push them to get started searching for Simulacrum Sedafkar, aka getting on the Orient Express and starting the adventure. 2. Give them basic info on the Sedafkar Simulacrum and where they need to go to collect it. And 3. An idea on who their assailants might be. And also a subpoint, I also recommend rewriting Beddoes' handout, since it's not that legible in the book as is. Text is just hard to read in the base book, I think. So I have a sample handout that I created down below in the description box. Once you've done all that exposition dump, the players are allowed to go as they see fit, either back to the museum, maybe to a library in London, or they could just head immediately to the Orient Express the day after. In my case, my players decided to head to the library to do some more research on the Simulacrum and the scrolls. While doing research, they actually saw Elizabeth Lima sleeping at the library, which was strange because almost all 2 other times they met, she was up early, studying studiously on her research. So one of the investigators goes over to check up on her. And upon seeing the site, they see that Lima has her entire body skinned, with this Turkish text written on it: "The skinless one will not be denied." This moment, I think, is most powerful at the end of Dancer's Evening Fog, especially if the players go to do more investigation. Why? Because it sets the tone of what can possibly happen to them if they fail. By setting this tone, you're starting off on a good pace of horror, but also suspension on why Lima or why this person. Afterwards, our group headed to the horrors on the Orient Express, ready for what may come. Dancers in the Evening Fog is the beginning of the investigators' long journey across the Orient Express and across Europe and the Middle East. It is a great setup since it introduces the investigators to the MacGuffin and has handouts that are pretty necessary to guide them along the journey, especially handouts 5. I also know, as someone who's running this game, the VTT support is limited. So down below in the description box is a link to all of the handouts as well as some of the notes I mentioned earlier in this video. So hopefully you can use those to help you in your next game, whether it is Horror in the Orient Express or another horror campaign. In the next part, we'll be covering the scenario Les Flaws des Mal, I can't speak French by the way, as well as any questions about CSC and or running OT that I came across or you might have asked. Last but not least, special shoutouts to my Patreon supporters, Harrison Parker and Paul Volpe, for your continued contribution. You too can help me out by checking out my Patreon and Ko-fi down below in the description box. Also, if you want, feel free to like and subscribe to my content, leave a comment down below talking about Call of Cthulhu or this campaign, and as always, I'm your average, everyday, queer keeper of arcane lore, blurry disposition, and hope you all have an awesome day. Ciao.